Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history, Missouri. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. In the autumn of 1902, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources received what would become one of the most unsettling reports in the state's forestry records. The document, archived in Jefferson City until 1963, when it was transferred to microfilm and subsequently lost during a filing reorganization, detailed the discovery of a structure that defied all conventional understanding of wilderness habitation. Ranger Cornelius Wainwright had been patrolling the dense woodlands of the Mark Twain National Forest, approximately 15 miles southeast of Rolla, when he stumbled upon what he initially mistook for a limestone outcropping. The terrain in that section of the Ozarks was known for its irregular geological formations, and Wainwright, a veteran of 7 years in forest service, had grown accustomed to the strange shapes that nature carved from the region's abundant rock formations. What distinguished this particular discovery was not its presence, but rather the methodical precision of its construction. Upon closer inspection, Wainwright realized he was not looking at stone at all, but at an elaborate structure built entirely from the skeletal remains of various woodland animals. The ranger's initial report, written in his characteristic sparse prose, described walls composed of intricately interlocked deer ribs, support beams fashioned from bare femurs, and what appeared to be decorative elements crafted from smaller mammal skulls arranged in geometric patterns. The structure measured approximately 12 feet in length, 8 feet in width, and 7 feet at its highest point. According to Wainwright's measurements, recorded with the surveying tools he carried for mapping purposes, the construction demonstrated a level of architectural planning that suggested considerable time and effort. The bones had been cleaned completely of flesh and appeared to have been treated with some form of preservative, though Wainwright noted no discernible odor emanating from the structure. Wainwright had begun his career in Forest Service, following a brief stint as a telegraph operator in St. Louis. His background in the city had left him unprepared for many of the wilderness discoveries that became routine in his profession. He had encountered abandoned homesteads, long-forgotten burial sites, and the occasional illegal hunting camp. Nothing in his experience, however, had prepared him for the meticulous craftsmanship evident in this bone architecture. The ranger's report noted that the structure appeared to serve as some form of dwelling, complete with what could generously be described as furniture. Chairs had been assembled from interconnected rib cages, their seats formed by carefully positioned pelvic bones. A table of sorts occupied the center of the space, its surface created from a large, flat shoulder blade that Wainwright estimated had belonged to a mature elk. Along the walls, shelving units constructed from alternating leg bones held various objects that defied easy categorization. What troubled Wainwright most profoundly was not the existence of the structure itself, but rather the evidence of recent habitation. Fresh wood ash filled a fire pit constructed within a circle of animal skulls. Personal effects, including a water basin carved from what appeared to be a large tree fungus and several crude implements fashioned from antler material, suggested that whoever had built this place continued to use it regularly. The ranger's training mandated that he report unusual discoveries to his supervisor, District Forester Hiram Blackthorne, within 48 hours of any finding that might impact public safety or forest management. Wainwright completed his initial survey of the area, noting the approximate coordinates and sketching the structure's basic dimensions in his field notebook. He observed no signs of immediate threat, though he noted an unusual absence of typical forest sounds in the immediate vicinity of the bone house. 3 days passed before Wainwright could return to the site with additional personnel. District Forester Blackthorne, accompanied by Deputy Sheriff Mordecai Thorne from Pulaski County, made the journey into the forest on a crisp October morning. The trio followed Wainwright's carefully marked trail, a route that wound through increasingly dense underbrush as they moved deeper into the uncharted sections of the forest. What they found upon arrival challenged their ability to process what they were witnessing. The structure remained exactly as Wainwright had described, but additional details became apparent upon more thorough investigation. The bones used in the construction showed evidence of careful selection and preparation. Each piece had been cleaned with what appeared to be professional skill, and many showed signs of deliberate modification to ensure proper fit within the overall design. Deputy Sheriff Thorne's background included experience with crime scenes, and his examination of the site revealed additional concerning elements. Tool marks on several of the bones suggested the use of implements more sophisticated than typical hunting or trapping equipment. Some of the larger bones showed evidence of careful sawing, while smaller pieces bore marks consistent with precise carving techniques. Perhaps most unsettling was the discovery of what appeared to be a collection system. Behind the main structure, partially concealed by natural vegetation, the investigators found carefully organized piles of additional bones, sorted by type and size. The methodical arrangement suggested not a random collection of hunting spoils, but rather a deliberate accumulation of materials for ongoing construction projects. District Forester Blackthorne's report to the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, dated October 18, 1902, recommended immediate investigation by state authorities. His description emphasized the unusual nature of the discovery and expressed concerns about the potential for ongoing illegal activity within the forest boundaries. The report specifically noted the absence of any hunting permits issued for the area and questioned the legality of the extensive wildlife harvest that the bone collection represented. The state's response arrived in the form of Inspector Magnus Clearwater, a representative from the newly established Missouri Game and Fish Division. Clearwater's background included extensive experience with hunting violations and illegal trapping operations, but his subsequent report indicated that the bone house represented something far beyond typical poaching activities. Clearwater's investigation revealed that the bones used in the construction represented a diverse array of local wildlife, including deer, elk, bear, wild boar, various small mammals, and an extensive collection of bird skeletons. His preliminary count suggested that the remains of at least 40 individual animals had been incorporated into the structure and its associated components. The systematic nature of the collection and the professional quality of the bone preparation suggested either extensive experience in such work or access to specialized knowledge typically possessed by medical or scientific professionals. The inspector's search of the surrounding area yielded additional discoveries that deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. Approximately 50 yards from the main structure, concealed beneath a carefully constructed covering of branches and forest debris, the investigation team uncovered what appeared to be a workshop area. This secondary site contained various tools and implements, many of which seemed to have been specifically designed for bone preparation and modification. Among the tools recovered were several items that Clearwater could not immediately identify. Sharp implements fashioned from antler material showed wear patterns consistent with regular use, while several metal tools of unknown origin displayed a level of craftsmanship that suggested professional manufacture. Most puzzling were several instruments that appeared designed for precise measurement and marking, suggesting that the construction of the bone house had been undertaken with considerable planning and technical precision. Clearwater's investigation also uncovered evidence that the site had been in use for an extended period. Layers of accumulated debris suggested regular habitation over multiple seasons, while wear patterns on various components of the structure indicated repeated use and occasional repair. Of particular note was evidence that the structure had been expanded over time, with newer sections displaying slightly different construction techniques and incorporating different types of bone materials. The question of who could have undertaken such an elaborate project haunted the investigators. The level of skill required for the bone preparation alone suggested either professional training or extensive practical experience. The architectural knowledge evident in the structure's design indicated familiarity with construction techniques far beyond what might be expected from a typical wilderness dweller. Local inquiries yielded little useful information. Residents of Rolla and the surrounding communities reported no knowledge of unusual activities in the forest areas where the discovery had been made. Several longtime residents mentioned occasional strange sounds emanating from the deeper forest regions during certain seasons, but these reports were generally attributed to normal wildlife behavior or the activities of known hermits who occasionally sheltered in the wilderness areas. More troubling were reports from hunters and trappers who mentioned areas of the forest where game animals seemed unusually scarce. Several experienced outdoorsmen described regions where the typical sounds of forest life fell silent, creating an atmosphere of unnatural quiet that made even seasoned woodsmen uncomfortable. These areas, according to multiple independent accounts, had exhibited these characteristics for several years prior to the discovery of the bone house. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Inspector Clearwater located a longtime resident of the region who claimed knowledge of unusual activities in the forest. Ezekiel Mortimer, an elderly trapper who had worked the Ozark wilderness for more than 3 decades, reluctantly shared information that had troubled him for several years, but which he had hesitated to report to authorities. According to Mortimer's account, he had encountered evidence of extensive animal processing operations during his trapping expeditions. He described finding areas where large numbers of animal carcasses had been systematically stripped of all flesh, leaving behind skeletal remains that had been organized and sorted with unusual precision. Mortimer's experience suggested that these operations were conducted by someone with considerable skill in animal processing, far beyond what would be expected from typical hunting or trapping activities. Mortimer's testimony also included descriptions of unusual sounds that he had observed during certain periods of the year. He reported hearing what he characterized as rhythmic scraping and tapping sounds emanating from the deeper forest areas, particularly during the late autumn months when most wildlife had retreated to winter shelters. These sounds, which occurred primarily during daylight hours, suggested ongoing construction or manufacturing activities rather than typical wilderness sounds. The trapper's account included details that aligned closely with the investigators' findings at the bone house site. Mortimer described observing smoke rising from forest areas where no legitimate fires should have been present, and he reported discovering carefully maintained trails that led deeper into the wilderness than most people ever ventured. His descriptions of the methodical nature of the animal processing operations matched the evidence found at the bone house location. Perhaps most significantly, Mortimer's testimony suggested that the activities he had observed were not recent developments. His account indicated that he had been noticing signs of these operations for at least 5 years prior to the official discovery of the bone house. This timeline suggested that whoever was responsible for the construction had been active in the area for an extended period, operating with sufficient skill and caution to avoid detection by authorities. The implications of Mortimer's testimony prompted Inspector Clearwater to expand his investigation. Additional searches of the surrounding forest areas revealed evidence of multiple sites where large-scale animal processing had taken place. These locations, scattered across several square miles of wilderness, showed evidence of systematic operations conducted with considerable planning and organization. Each processing site displayed similar characteristics: carefully constructed fire pits for bone cleaning operations, organized storage areas for tools and materials, and evidence of methodical sorting and classification of animal remains. The scale of these operations suggested either the work of multiple individuals or the sustained efforts of someone with extraordinary dedication to their unusual project. The investigation also uncovered evidence of a complex logistics system that had facilitated the movement of materials between various sites. Well-maintained paths, carefully concealed from casual observation but clearly designed for regular use, connected the processing areas to the main bone house location. These trails showed signs of heavy use and indicated that substantial quantities of materials had been transported along these routes over extended periods. Dr. Cornelius Ashworth, a professor of anatomy at the University of Missouri who was consulted regarding the technical aspects of the bone preparation, provided insights that further complicated the investigation. His examination of several bone samples revealed evidence of preparation techniques that suggested formal training in anatomical sciences. The precision of the cuts, the methods used for cleaning and preservation, and the understanding of skeletal structure evident in the construction all pointed to someone with considerable educational background or professional experience. Dr. Ashworth's analysis also revealed that many of the bones had been treated with chemical preservatives that were not commonly available to the general public. The specific compounds used in the treatment process suggested access to laboratory supplies or medical materials that would typically be found only in academic or professional settings. This finding raised questions about the background and resources of whoever had undertaken the bone house construction. The professor's report noted additional technical details that shed light on the sophisticated nature of the construction project. The joints and connections used to assemble the bone structure demonstrated understanding of architectural principles and structural engineering. The builder had employed techniques for distributing weight and stress that ensured the stability of the structure while using materials that would not typically be considered suitable for construction purposes. Further investigation revealed that the bone house represented only a small portion of a much larger operation. Systematic searches of the surrounding wilderness areas uncovered evidence of additional structures in various stages of construction. These discoveries suggested an ongoing project of considerable scope, with the completed bone house serving as either a prototype or the first phase of a more ambitious undertaking. The additional structures varied in their level of completion and complexity. Some consisted of basic frameworks that outlined the intended shape and size of future buildings, while others had progressed to the point where walls and basic structural elements were in place. The variety of construction techniques and approaches suggested either experimentation with different methods or adaptation to the specific types of bone materials available at different times. One partially completed structure appeared designed to serve as a workshop or laboratory facility. This building, located approximately half a mile from the original bone house discovery, incorporated features that suggested its intended use for continued bone processing and preparation activities. The design included specialized work areas, storage facilities for tools and materials, and what appeared to be a more sophisticated system for bone cleaning and preservation. The scope of the overall project raised questions about the timeline and planning involved in its development. The evidence suggested that construction had been ongoing for several years, with work proceeding systematically from one structure to the next. The methodical approach indicated long-term planning and suggested that whoever was responsible for the project had developed comprehensive plans for continued expansion. As winter approached, the investigation faced practical limitations imposed by weather conditions and the remote locations of the various sites. Inspector Clearwater's final report, submitted to the Missouri Department of Natural Resources in December 1902, documented the findings but acknowledged that many questions remained unanswered. The identity of the builder, the ultimate purpose of the structures, and the source of the extensive bone materials all remained mysteries. The report recommended continued monitoring of the area and suggested that additional investigative resources might be needed to fully understand the scope and implications of the discovery. However, the remote location of the sites and the substantial resources required for comprehensive investigation made it unlikely that immediate action would be taken beyond basic security measures to prevent public access to the areas. Local authorities implemented a policy of regular patrols in the forest areas where the discoveries had been made, but the vast expanse of wilderness and the concealed nature of the sites made effective monitoring extremely difficult. The patrols were designed more to document any changes in the situation rather than to prevent continued activity by whoever was responsible for the construction projects. During the winter months, the remote locations of the bone structures made them effectively inaccessible to investigators. Snow cover and harsh weather conditions prevented regular observation of the sites, creating a period during which any ongoing activities would proceed without official oversight. This limitation troubled the investigators, who suspected that winter might actually represent a period of increased activity for whoever was responsible for the construction projects. Spring 1903 brought renewed investigation efforts as weather conditions permitted access to the remote sites. The investigators' return to the Bone House location revealed that significant changes had occurred during the winter months. The structure showed evidence of continued expansion and modification, with new sections added to the original building and improvements made to existing components. More concerning was evidence that the site had been regularly occupied during the winter period. The investigators found indications of sustained habitation, including accumulated debris from food preparation, evidence of regular fire use, and signs that the structure had been modified to provide better protection from winter weather conditions. These findings suggested that whoever was responsible for the construction had been using the Bone House as a primary residence rather than a temporary shelter. The spring investigation also revealed that work had continued on the additional structures discovered the previous autumn. Several buildings that had been in early stages of construction now showed substantial progress, with completed walls, roofing systems, and interior features. The pace of construction suggested either increased effort by the original builder or the possibility that additional individuals had joined the project. Perhaps most troubling was the discovery of evidence suggesting that the bone collection activities had continued throughout the winter. Fresh processing sites were found in areas that had not previously shown signs of such activity, and the quantity of new bone materials indicated that substantial hunting or trapping operations had been conducted during the period when official monitoring was impossible. The expansion of activities raised concerns about the potential impact on local wildlife populations. The quantity of animal remains incorporated into the various structures and found at processing sites suggested that hunting pressure in the area far exceeded what would be considered sustainable. Inspector Clearwater's spring report noted concerns about the long-term ecological effects of continued operations at the current scale. Attempts to establish more effective monitoring of the sites proved challenging due to the remote locations and the apparent ability of whoever was responsible to detect and avoid official presence. On several occasions, investigators arrived at sites to find evidence of recent activity, but no sign of current occupation. The patterns suggested sophisticated knowledge of investigative methods and considerable skill in avoiding detection. The investigation took a new direction when authorities decided to attempt direct contact with whoever was responsible for the construction projects. Rather than continuing covert observation efforts, officials opted to leave written communications at the various sites, requesting voluntary cooperation with the investigation and offering assurances that the initial focus would be on understanding the purpose and methods of the construction rather than prosecution for any violations that might be involved. This approach yielded unexpected results. Within a week of leaving the initial communications, investigators found responses that had been left at one of the processing sites. These communications, written on bark panels using what appeared to be charcoal-based ink, provided the first direct information about the motivations and background of the mysterious builder. The responses revealed that the construction projects were the work of a single individual who identified himself only as the architect. The communications indicated that the bone structures represented an artistic and philosophical project rather than practical dwellings. According to these explanations, the buildings were designed to demonstrate the potential for creating functional architecture for materials that most people would consider unsuitable for construction. The architect's communications also provided insights into the methods and planning behind the construction projects. The responses indicated that the selection and preparation of bone materials followed specific criteria designed to ensure both structural integrity and aesthetic consistency. The builder claimed to have developed specialized techniques for bone preparation and preservation that ensured the longevity and stability of the completed structures. More intriguingly, the communications suggested that the construction projects were part of a larger philosophical statement about the relationship between human activity and natural systems. The architect claimed that his work demonstrated how materials that were typically discarded or ignored could be transformed into functional and beautiful creations, representing a more harmonious approach to utilizing natural resources. The correspondence continued over several months, with investigators leaving questions and requests for information, and the architect providing responses that gradually revealed more details about his background and motivations. These exchanges painted a picture of an individual with extensive education and professional experience who had chosen to pursue his unusual project in isolation from conventional society. According to his own account, the architect had previously worked in fields related to construction and design, though he declined to provide specific details about his professional background or identity. His communications demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of architectural principles, engineering concepts, and material science, supporting his claims of relevant expertise and education. The correspondence also revealed that the architect viewed his project as having broader implications beyond the immediate construction activities. He suggested that his work represented a form of experimental research into alternative building techniques and materials, with potential applications for more conventional construction projects. He claimed that his bone preservation and preparation methods could be adapted for use with other organic materials, opening possibilities for more sustainable and environmentally conscious building approaches. As the correspondence continued, the architect gradually shared more information about the scope and timeline of his project. He indicated that the current construction activities represented only the initial phase of a much more ambitious undertaking. His long-term plans included the development of an entire community of bone structures, each designed for specific functions and incorporating increasingly sophisticated architectural and engineering concepts. The revelation of these expanded plans raised new concerns for the investigating authorities. The scale of the proposed construction would require enormous quantities of bone materials, raising questions about the sustainability of the wildlife populations in the area. Additionally, the prospect of a permanent settlement in the remote forest areas posed potential complications for land management and public safety oversight. Inspector Clearwater's reports during this period reflected growing uncertainty about how to respond to the situation. The architect's cooperation with the correspondence process and his apparent willingness to share information about his activities suggested that he posed no immediate threat to public safety. However, the unconventional nature of his project and its potential long-term implications created a situation for which existing regulations and procedures provided little guidance. The correspondence also revealed that the architect possessed detailed knowledge of local wildlife patterns and population dynamics. His communications included sophisticated analysis of hunting pressure and its effects on animal populations, suggesting that he had carefully planned his bone collection activities to minimize ecological impact. He claimed to be following sustainable harvesting principles that would ensure the long-term viability of local wildlife populations. These claims were difficult for authorities to verify, given the remote locations and the specialized knowledge required to assess wildlife management issues. However, consultation with experts at the University of Missouri suggested that the architect's statements demonstrated genuine understanding of ecological principles and wildlife management concepts. Dr. Thaddeus Pemberton, a professor of natural history who was asked to review the architect's communications, noted that the descriptions of hunting and trapping methods indicated considerable expertise in wildlife management. The techniques described in the correspondence were consistent with scientific approaches to wildlife harvesting, suggesting either formal training in natural sciences or extensive practical experience in wildlife management. The summer of 1903 brought new developments as the architect's correspondence revealed his willingness to allow official inspection of his completed structures. This represented a significant shift from his previous insistence on avoiding direct contact with authorities. His communications indicated that he had reached a point in his project where he was confident in the quality and safety of his construction work and was interested in obtaining professional assessment of his architectural innovations. The formal inspection of the bone house and associated structures was conducted by a team including Inspector Clearwater, Dr. Ashworth from the University of Missouri, and Jeremiah Stonecroft, a professional architect from St. Louis who specialized in unconventional building materials and techniques. This inspection provided the first comprehensive technical assessment of the architect's construction methods and achievements. The inspection team's findings exceeded their expectations in terms of the sophistication and quality of the construction work. The bone structures demonstrated remarkable structural integrity with joints and connections that effectively distributed loads and stresses throughout the framework. The preservation and preparation of the bone materials had been executed with professional skill, resulting in components that showed no signs of deterioration despite extended exposure to outdoor conditions. Architect Stonecroft's technical evaluation noted several innovative features that had potential applications for conventional construction projects. The methods used for joining and connecting bone components had been adapted from traditional woodworking and metalworking techniques, but the specific adaptations represented original engineering solutions to the unique challenges presented by bone materials. The inspection also revealed the extent of the architect's planning and preparation for his project. The team found evidence of extensive testing and experimentation with different bone preparation methods, joint designs, and structural configurations. This preliminary work demonstrated systematic approach to problem-solving and quality control that was consistent with professional engineering practices. Dr. Ashworth's examination of the bone preparation techniques revealed the use of chemical treatments that enhanced both the structural properties and longevity of the materials. The specific compounds and application methods represented innovations that could potentially be adapted for preserving other organic materials used in construction applications. Perhaps most remarkably, the inspection team found that the completed structures were not only structurally sound, but also provided comfortable and functional living spaces. The bone house included effective systems for ventilation, drainage, and weather protection that created an environment suitable for long-term habitation. The interior design incorporated furniture and fixtures that demonstrated both practical functionality and aesthetic appeal. The success of the formal inspection led to expanded dialogue between the architect and various academic and professional organizations. Several universities expressed interest in studying his techniques and innovations, while professional associations related to architecture and construction sought to understand the potential applications of his methods. This increased attention also brought complications, as news of the unusual construction project began to spread beyond the immediate investigating authorities. Local newspapers began reporting on the Bone House discovery, attracting curiosity seekers and amateur investigators who sought to locate the structures for themselves. The increased attention created challenges for maintaining the security and privacy that the architect had previously enjoyed. The architect's correspondence during this period reflected growing ambivalence about the publicity his project was receiving. While he expressed satisfaction with the professional recognition of his technical achievements, he also indicated concern about the potential disruption to his work and the forest environment where he had established his operations. In response to these concerns, authorities implemented measures to control access to the areas where the architect's structures were located. Official policies restricted public entry to designated areas of the forest, while providing continued access for authorized researchers and investigators. These measures were designed to balance public interest with protection of ongoing research activities and environmental conservation. The academic interest in the architect's work led to the establishment of a formal research project aimed at documenting and analyzing his construction techniques and innovations. This project, sponsored jointly by the University of Missouri and the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, was designed to preserve knowledge of the techniques while respecting the architect's privacy and intellectual property rights. Dr. Magnus Blackwood, a professor of engineering who was appointed to lead the research project, began systematic documentation of the architect's methods through continued correspondence and periodic inspections of the structures. This work represented the first formal academic study of bone-based construction techniques and their potential applications for conventional building projects. The research project also included ecological studies aimed at assessing the long-term impact of the architect's bone collection activities on local wildlife populations. These studies, conducted by graduate students from the university's Natural History program, were designed to determine whether the hunting and trapping activities were sustainable and consistent with good wildlife management practices. Initial findings from the ecological studies suggested that the architect's claims about sustainable harvesting were largely accurate. Wildlife population surveys conducted in areas where bone collection activities had occurred showed no evidence of significant depletion or disruption. The hunting and trapping methods used appeared to target animals that had died from natural causes or represented surplus population that would not impact the long-term viability of local wildlife communities. The autumn of 1903 marked a significant transition in the architect's project as he began to share more detailed information about his long-term plans and objectives. His correspondence revealed that the bone structures represented only the initial phase of a comprehensive research program aimed at developing entirely new approaches to sustainable architecture and construction. According to these expanded explanations, the architect envisioned his work as contributing to broader solutions for environmental challenges related to resource consumption and waste generation in construction industries. He suggested that his bone preservation and utilization techniques could be adapted for use with various organic waste materials, potentially reducing the environmental impact of conventional building practices. The architect's vision extended beyond individual building techniques to encompass entire systems for sustainable community development. His plans included integrated approaches to waste management, resource utilization, and environmental conservation that could support permanent settlements with minimal ecological impact. These ambitious goals attracted attention from environmental conservationists and social reformers, who saw potential applications for the architect's approaches in addressing urban housing problems and rural development challenges. Correspondence from these groups indicated interest in supporting expanded research and development of the techniques for broader application. However, the practical implementation of these expanded visions faced significant challenges related to social acceptance and regulatory approval. The unconventional appearance and methods of bone-based construction created barriers to acceptance by conventional communities and regulatory authorities. Additionally, the specialized knowledge and skills required for effective implementation limited the potential for widespread adoption of the techniques. The winter of 1903-1904 brought unexpected developments, as the architect's correspondence indicated his intention to relocate his operations to a more remote area where he could continue his research without the complications created by increasing public attention. This decision reflected his preference for working in isolation and his concerns about the potential disruption to his research caused by outside interest and interference. The prospect of the architect's departure created challenges for the ongoing research project and raised questions about the long-term preservation of his innovative techniques and methods. Dr. Blackwood and other researchers expressed concerns about losing access to the architect's expertise and the opportunity to document his work comprehensively. Negotiations between the architect and university researchers resulted in an agreement for expanded documentation efforts during the remaining period before his planned departure. This intensive documentation project was designed to preserve detailed records of his construction techniques, bone preparation methods, and architectural innovations for future study and potential application. The documentation project revealed additional aspects of the architect's work that had not been apparent from earlier investigations. His methods included sophisticated quality control procedures, standardized preparation protocols, and systematic approaches to materials testing and evaluation. These systematic approaches demonstrated that his work represented genuine engineering research, rather than simply artistic or philosophical experimentation. The final phase of documentation also included detailed structural analysis of the completed bone structures, conducted by engineering students under Dr. Blackwood's supervision. This analysis provided quantitative data about the performance characteristics of bone-based construction materials and their suitability for various architectural applications. The results of this analysis surprised the research team with the favorable performance characteristics demonstrated by properly prepared bone materials. The structural properties, durability, and weather resistance of the bone components proved comparable to conventional building materials in many applications, supporting the architect's claims about the practical potential of his techniques. As spring 1904 approached, preparations for the architect's departure intensified. His correspondence indicated that he had identified a suitable location for continued research in the remote wilderness areas of northern Missouri, where he could continue his work without the complications created by public attention and official oversight. The final communications from the architect included expressions of gratitude for the cooperation and interest shown by the investigating authorities and university researchers. He indicated satisfaction with the level of documentation that had been achieved and expressed hope that the techniques he had developed would prove useful for future applications in sustainable construction and environmental conservation. The departure of the architect was confirmed when spring patrols of his construction sites found evidence that the structures had been carefully dismantled and all usable materials removed. The systematic nature of the dismantling process demonstrated the same careful planning and organization that had characterized the original construction work. The sites where the architect's structures had been located showed no evidence of environmental damage or lasting impact from the construction activities. The careful removal of all non-natural materials and the restoration of natural vegetation patterns demonstrated commitment to environmental conservation principles consistent with his stated philosophy. The legacy of the architect's work continued through the academic research that had documented his techniques and innovations. Dr. Blackwood's final report on the research project, submitted to the Missouri Department of Natural Resources in June 1904, provided comprehensive documentation of bone-based construction methods and their potential applications for sustainable building practices. The report concluded that the architect's work represented a genuine contribution to understanding alternative building materials and construction techniques. The methods he had developed demonstrated practical potential for addressing resource conservation challenges in construction industries, though significant additional research would be needed to adapt the techniques for widespread application. Subsequent years brought occasional reports of similar bone structures discovered in remote wilderness areas of Missouri and neighboring states, suggesting that the architect or others using his techniques continued to pursue related research and development activities. However, none of these subsequent discoveries provided the same level of access to the builder or the opportunity for detailed documentation of methods and techniques. The Bone House Project remained a unique case study in alternative construction methods and sustainable resource utilization. The documentation preserved by Dr. Blackwood and the University of Missouri research team continued to be referenced by students and researchers interested in innovative building techniques and environmental conservation approaches. In 1924, 20 years after the architect's departure from the original site, Dr. Blackwood published a comprehensive academic paper detailing the techniques and innovations that had been documented during the research project. This publication represented the first formal presentation of bone-based construction methods in professional architectural and engineering literature. The paper attracted international attention from researchers interested in sustainable construction methods and alternative building materials. Several universities initiated research projects aimed at adapting the architect's techniques for use with other organic waste materials, exploring potential applications for reducing environmental impact in construction industries. However, practical implementation of bone-based construction techniques remained limited by social acceptance challenges and regulatory restrictions. The unconventional appearance and associations of bone-based structures created barriers to acceptance in conventional communities, while building codes and safety regulations were not designed to accommodate such innovative approaches. The academic interest in the architect's work contributed to broader research into sustainable construction methods and alternative building materials. His systematic approaches to materials testing, quality control, and performance evaluation provided models for research methodologies that were applied to studies of other unconventional building materials and techniques. The environmental conservation principles demonstrated in the architect's work also influenced developing concepts in ecological design and sustainable development. His integration of resource utilization with environmental conservation provided early examples of approaches that would later become central to green building movements and sustainable architecture practices. By the 1940s, the architect's Bone House Project had become part of the folklore and oral history of the Missouri Ozarks region. Local residents shared stories about the mysterious builder and his unusual structures, though many details had been distorted or embellished through repeated retelling over the decades. The original documentation preserved by the University of Missouri research team remained the authoritative source of information about the architect's methods and achievements. These records continued to be consulted by researchers interested in historical examples of innovative construction techniques and sustainable resource utilization. In 1963, the original investigation files maintained by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources were transferred to microfilm as part of a modernization program for government records management. During this transfer process, some original documents were lost or misfiled, reducing the available documentation of the initial discovery and investigation of the Bone House. The transfer to microfilm coincided with renewed academic interest in the architect's work, prompted by growing environmental awareness and interest in alternative technologies during the 1960s. Researchers from several universities sought access to the original investigation files, only to discover that key documents had been lost during the transfer process. The loss of original documentation created challenges for subsequent research into the architect's methods and techniques. While Dr. Blackwood's academic publications preserved many technical details, the investigation files had contained additional information about the architect's background and the broader context of his project that was no longer available to researchers. Despite these limitations, the architect's Bone House project continued to be referenced as an early example of innovative approaches to sustainable construction and alternative building materials. His systematic methods and successful integration of resource conservation with functional architecture provided historical precedent for later developments in green building and sustainable design. The remote forest locations where the architect had conducted his research gradually returned to their natural state, with no visible evidence remaining of the unusual construction activities that had taken place there during the early 1900s. The sites became part of the expanded Mark Twain National Forest System, protected as wilderness areas under federal conservation programs. Occasional hikers and researchers continued to search for evidence of the architect's work in the forest areas where his structures had been documented, but the passage of time and natural processes had eliminated all traces of his activities. The only permanent legacy of his project remained in the academic records and research documentation preserved by university archives. The Bone House discovery of 1902 stands as a unique example of individual innovation in construction techniques and sustainable resource utilization. The architect's work demonstrated the potential for creative approaches to building materials and environmental conservation, while his systematic research methods provided models for academic investigation of alternative technologies. His commitment to environmental conservation and sustainable harvesting practices anticipated later developments in ecological design and green building movements. The integration of artistic vision with technical innovation in his work provided early examples of approaches that would become central to sustainable architecture and environmental design. The mystery surrounding the architect's identity and subsequent activities has contributed to the enduring fascination with his Bone House project. His deliberate anonymity and preference for working in isolation reflected a commitment to the work itself, rather than personal recognition or commercial success. The careful documentation of his techniques by university researchers ensured that knowledge of his innovations was preserved for future study and potential application. This documentation represented one of the earliest examples of systematic academic study of alternative construction methods and sustainable building practices. Today, more than a century after the original discovery, the architect's Bone House project continues to be referenced in studies of sustainable construction and alternative building materials. His work represents a unique historical example of individual innovation in addressing environmental challenges through creative approaches to resource utilization and architectural design. The techniques he developed for bone preparation and preservation, the structural methods he innovated for joining organic materials, and the systematic approaches he employed for quality control and performance testing all contributed to understanding of alternative construction possibilities that remain relevant to contemporary challenges in sustainable building and environmental conservation. The bone structures of Missouri stand as a testament to the potential for human ingenuity to find innovative solutions to resource challenges while maintaining respect for environmental systems. Though the architect himself disappeared into the wilderness more than a century ago, His legacy continues through the documentation of his work and its ongoing influence on research into sustainable construction and alternative building materials. The forest locations where his unusual experiment took place have returned to their natural state. But the knowledge preserved from his project continues to contribute to understanding of how creative approaches to materials and construction can address contemporary challenges in environmental conservation and sustainable development. And perhaps in some remote wilderness area, the work continues still, as methodical and carefully planned as it was when first discovered in the autumn of 1902, when a forest ranger stumbled upon a house that should not have existed, built from materials that challenged every assumption about the possibilities of architecture and the relationship between human ingenuity and the natural world.